you're doing 3 films back to back, the danger of the train derailing was huge. We knew we had to plan these movies as detailed as we possibly could because there'd be very little room for error.
When Peter set out to start designing the film, he basically pre-visualized every shot. Sometimes with a high level of detail, sometimes just as a sketch.
It's to give everyone, including Peter, a good feel as to, okay, this is what the flavor of the film is, and he can then evaluate where scenes are running too long, even scenes that he may want to cut out entirely, all before he's wasting film, shooting actors and sets and having a crew costing tens of thousands standing around.
We knew we had to run a very tight ship, as it were, so that when we started shooting, we knew we'd get tired, we knew we'd get exhausted, that all sorts of pressures would descend on us, and we just had to have a great focused plan to be able to get us through each day.
When we were developing the movie, Peter spent an extensive amount of time committing the film in its entirety to storyboards.
And he ended up storyboarding all the films, basically every frame we see in these films had already been storyboarded by Peter. And so we're able to work from visual reference.
The storyboarding process was the most basic form of pre-visualizing the film. It's 2D pencil drawings, single panels, nothing's moving, there's no real evidence of what the camera moves are going to be. You get an idea, okay, we pan from this character to this character, we tilt down from this object to that object, but we don't get any feel for how fast those camera moves are, or actually even the logistics.
Christian storyboarded most of the films that I made. I first met him when he was like a 17-year-old school kid.
When I'm storyboarding with Peter, I think I've got the luckiest job on the planet.
So you get a sort of an effect of the horses.
I sit down with him,
would be
and he
kind of
describes
like
the shot to me. So usually I get it in the first drawing. Sometimes I have to push it to 2. If it's a really difficult shot, I might have to just quickly do a third sketch.
Christian understands very much the sensibility that I have, and we started storyboarding as we were writing the script, so we didn't even wait for the script to be finished.
It's his way of checking that the ideas that he has for telling the story are going to work.
I mean, that is the single thing that I think storyboards are most valuable for me, is that they're a cheap pass at the movie. I get to make the movie at a really, really low cost for the price of a few pencils and some paper. But it effectively has put me through the process of making the film. As a director, I've had a go. I've done version number 1, and I can get to look at the movie complete.
Which was a great tool. It was never intended and never was the final version of the movie. I've worked with some directors who will storyboard their film, and you'll really see those storyboards on screen. Peter's not that kind of a director. Peter uses it for inspiration, for communication with the departments, but you know that those storyboards are going to change. They're a starting point, not an end point for Peter. Not only doing the storyboards, but then having them shaded and then photographing them as an animatic.
We had made what we called an animatic, which was basically videotaping each frame of the storyboards.
The storyboards are all, they're digitized, they're edited together as the shots will or would be edited together in the film, and it's basically a little black and white 2D drawing version of the film itself.
We'd got some local New Zealand actors together in a studio, and there was 5 or 6 actors, and they had read through the script in a recording studio, playing the different characters, and then those voice tracks had been edited with the storyboards.
What are you doing?
Fried eggs, sausages, and nice crispy bacon.
I've saved some for you, Mr. Frodo. You idiots! Put this out!
Was looking at a version like of the Lord of the Rings as almost like a comic book with words, and we put temp music with it.
You're seeing the storyboards as they pace in the film, as you want them to pace in the film, and so you get a feeling for the progression of story and the pacing of the storytelling.
Peter told us about it, and he was like, all right, I'll screen it for you before we start filming. And we all got to Pete's house, and he screened us this animatic, and it was a trip to read the script and talk about the script and get ready for the process of making the film, and then suddenly see a very rough compilation of those ideas put onto the screen. I mean, in some ways, we'd felt like we'd watched the film. What was great about that is the script was powerful enough that it actually came across and it resonated in that rough form.
And what we did on this movie, which I'd never done before, is I wanted to go one more stage with the storyboards and make them more accurate than they usually are. Grant Major would draw up the final plans for each set that had been designed.
Some of these were initially made into architectural models, which were made fairly quickly.
We ended up calling them animatic models, and we used them so that Peter could actually get a lipstick camera, get little toys. You know, we get little figurines that we always had, like Hobbit size, you know, human size, you know, Balrog size. We had all these little toys, and it was great. He could actually have them in this little, you know, model that was either a reference point for the set or for a miniature down the road.
So the storyboards that he had done previously were expanded on shot by shot by the use of his camera working around our models.
And we'd have it hooked up to a video monitor that I'd have a freeze frame function on. And he'd say, okay, that's, you know, sometimes you'd just sit there and you'd see him sort of, you know, just pottering around, just trying to work out what kind of camera move he'd want to do for the shot. And you'd place the figures and he'd, you know, okay, that's the frame, I'd pause it and then draw from the screen.
Christian could actually sit there and go, okay, so you're thinking this frame, yeah, okay. And then he could actually draw out, sketch out the storyboard that was reflected on the monitor that actually, you know, was to scale. That, you know, that was showing something that had the figure to the background all to scale and made sense and could actually be replicated when you thought about what you were shooting on the set.
We basically knew that we were publishing a set of storyboards that were actually accurate, that this angle was here, and when we finally walked onto the set in a year's time with the actors and the full set was built, we'd be able to find exactly the same angle on set as we had with the miniature.
Early on, essentially the first set that was ever constructed was Bag Ant. Peter Jackson thought, hey, you know what we need to do is we need to go in there and get a video camera and I'm gonna sort of work through kind of, you know, the space and just get a feeling for it.
Yeah, you will keep an eye on Frodo, won't you?
Yes, I will. 2 eyes as often as I can spare them.
Scene 12, shot 1.
I was very worried about Bag Ant because I knew just how small the set was, and once you get 50 or 60 crew members in there, it's going to become cluttered very quickly and very difficult to work in. And so I wanted just to be able to really get my head into how we would shoot these scenes. And I'd done my little lipstick camera mock-ups with a cardboard model some months earlier, because we were also trying to figure out ways to shoot the scales too, because we had Gandalf had to be tall, and Bilbo and Frodo happened to be small, and we were starting to get our heads into how we were going to shoot all this stuff. And I got a few of the people on the film. So we turned up on the Sunday on set with a video camera. I played Bilbo, and Rick Porras played something, and we sort of did a mock-up of the entire scene that we were going to shoot, ultimately with Ian McKellen and Elijah and Ian Holm. And that again, it turned out to be a relatively accurate. I mean, I think we made script changes eventually, so things altered a bit, but it turned out to be a relatively accurate version of what ultimately was in the film.
Through me, that ring would wield a power too great
And terrible to imagine.
Beyond the storyboarding, we also did like another level of planning, which is sort of like bringing the storyboards to life in a variety of ways. And it's called Previsualisation, is what it's called, Previs.
Pete was able to use Previs to help him tell his story. He wanted to turn a lot of his 2D storyboards into 3D moving cameras. He's a very dynamic filmmaker. He likes big sweeping camera moves.
Just at the ideal moment while we were in pre-production, Rick McCallum, the producer of Star Wars, came to New Zealand on a trip, and I was talking to Rick about the whole pre-visualization process, and they'd obviously basically developed their own previs department for Star Wars. And so Rick said, look, if you're ever in the States, come by and visit, and we'll show you what we've done. And so a few weeks later, we were in San Francisco and visited the ranch, and he was incredibly generous at just basically introducing us to their previs department.
Rick McCallum and George Lucas have been incredibly helpful to him and to the rest of us in terms of just offering up advice with some of these new approaches that they were doing. So Peter really grabbed a hold of this idea and said, hey guys, this is something we should be doing. So what we did was we went out and we searched for young, recent graduates of graphic art schools, and the kind of folks that love film and have a passion for film, maybe wanting to try to make a foray into the world of visual effects, and this could be an interesting opportunity for them.
Previs is doing about 144 shots from film 1. The workshop and the art department provide the designs that we use in Previs to build in the computer. The shots that we're working on are effects shots and anything that Peter can't really get his head around, that he wants to take a look at it in the 3D environment. And that's what Previs is for, to help Peter create his vision.
Peter was very much present in Previs, and he'd come in, very exciting to him to see his, see his movie coming to life and trying out the camera angles on sets that hadn't been built yet. First thing we did was the whole Khazad-dûm stair chase.
We built basically a copy of Alan's drawing sort of in 3D in a computer and began to experiment with angles and shots. The miniature of the staircase was also constructed by Richard Taylor. The actual miniature that ended up being used in the movie was one of the very first miniatures that Richard built, and so we were able to also use that miniature to plot a lot of camera angles and to plan it. And so, gradually over the course of possibly a year, this drawing of Alan Lee's had inspired and led to the creation of this hugely complicated, hugely expensive scene.
Peter cut out a lot of bits, but it was even wilder. You had Frodo's point of view going down the stairs, and it's like going, running like this and up at him and nearly falling off, all this close work on them. And in some ways, and tripping and falling and rolling down right almost to the breach and being grabbed at the end, looking over, and then the arrows start coming, It was wilder, but eventually it got to the point where, you got to cut somewhere. Too bad.
And obviously it's a fantastic tool, and it just became apparent, well, that's a tool I'm going to need to use to help create these films.
Christian Rivers storyboarded the film with me, which is sort of continuing. I mean, even today he's still working, doing storyboards for the 2000 Return of the King, and he's been working on this for probably, it must be nearly 4 to 5 years now. I find that scenes that were born in Previs are often the more imaginative scenes, because you feel brave when you're just devising these crazy shots with little computers and stuff, but ultimately those crazy shots play an important part in defining the style of the film.
That's where I feel like I've been able to learn from him, because it's the stuff that I was sure wouldn't work that he makes work. And one of the things that I said to myself when I came down here was, I already know what I know, but I don't know what he knows. So I'm going to keep my eyes open, because he does a lot of things that shouldn't work but do. And that's the fun of it, is hearing something that sounds just impossible at the beginning and then seeing how he puzzles it out.